I pressed the wrong button. Dang it.
Oh no. Oh no.
No, it's playing the thing already. Let's try that again. 48-hour art check. Round something. 127 or whatever. What is it?
128.
128. Ah, that's crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Too much.
Oh man. Now I'm all like excited and I want to reanimate.
I know.
Someday we should tackle that. Yes. So I don't feel like a giant pile of phlegm and bile.
That's good.
It's significantly better than I was before.
Good. I'm glad you're back on the mend, man.
Yeah. Now I've just got that weird dry, useless cough that doesn't do anything, but it doesn't feel horrible. So.
Yeah. Well, I hope it doesn't stick around for like a week and a half like it did for me.
Right. Oh man. All right, let's do it. Should we do it? Oh wait,
yes.
I've got to stall for me for a minute. I've got to load your image. I forgot. I did. Let's do this. And
all right. So whilst the images are loading, I just thought I'd mention 128 48-hour art checks is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
We're piling these things up. So like if you guys are sweating doing one, just think about it. 128 you could be at easily.
I made half a joke the other day. We're part of that anthology, and Mike Emirates, who is editing it, he was like, "Hey guys, get your final pages in, and we've got a week, right?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm doing that tonight." And he's like, "Oh, don't worry about it, man. You've got a week." And I was like, "No, don't tell me that. I literally built this entire system so that I would have deadlines every 48 hours. Like, if you tell me I've got a week, I'm going to take a week, It's like, and I was like, that's kind of funny, but also exactly true. So it's, it's awesome. So anyway, all right.
That could tie into a whole different topic than the one we're going to hit today.
Right.
The topic of deadlines for leadership. Very important.
All right. We're doing it. Okay. So what did you get done in the last 48 hours?
So I've managed to ink 2.5 more panels, and I should have the page finished by tomorrow. So I'm pretty excited. But yeah, so I'm getting closer and closer to the end point of this story, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's kind of at the middle point at this point, but
the end point of like volume 1, right?
Yeah, the end point of volume 1, the middle point of this story. So
right.
I probably have about so many pages left. I'm not quite sure yet, but
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. I cut a video about how to do an animatic, and then I realized that you can actually edit YouTube videos now. So like after they're up, you can edit them, and you don't have to re-upload anything or whatever. And so here's my weird little animatic that I did as an example of what an animatic is. It's kind of fun. And man, I just really like doing like live video. It's so much like quicker than editing it after the fact.
Yeah.
So
it's super efficient, and like as we said at the top, it's like you start doing this thing, you could have 128 episodes in no time. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But the way it's sustainable, and this is for anybody who might be considering doing an art check, just stream it, just do it live.
Yeah.
Do it off the cuff. Make it as easy and systematic as possible, so that you don't end up getting buried in an editing loop, So, yeah.
As we've proved with our podcasts, even just a little bit of editing can just bogs you down. So
yeah.
So how about challenges?
Okay, so that's interesting. The main challenge, actually, I'm not hitting a ton. Allergies are nuts, and I have bad genes, so I get really bad allergies. And so that's been kind of putting me out, like just kind of in a fog. Other than that, just work. and family life and the balance. So just kind of the typical struggle, where it's like a long commute, art directing, and then parenting and husbanding and doing all of that. It's like it's a lot of plates, but it's not like, it's definitely not the worst of any struggles I've hit. Like it feels like I haven't really hit too many struggles in the last few days, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. Things are going really well. You know, I have problems like tonight. My kid wouldn't go to bed because she like, you know, I can turn her light off remotely because it's all like Alexa enabled or whatever. So I let her read for usually like half an hour to an hour before I turn her light off. I turn her light off. She comes in. She's like, "Dad, I'm right at the part where like Rosa Parks just starts the bus boycott. And so can I keep reading?" And I'm like, what am I going to say no to, like, you know? So she's all excited. Then I turn the light back on. She comes back like, you know, half an hour later and she's like, "Dad, I finished the whole book and I've taken all these notes and I got to tell you about it while I'm still excited." I'm like, all right. So like I didn't get done with anything or get started on anything, but I'm like, I'm cool with that. Like she's super excited because she's doing this whole book report on Rosa Parks and stuff. And so she's like, yeah, so she's all stoked. But like, yeah, that was literally up until just a couple minutes ago that I was like, you do have to go to bed now. It's like an hour and a half past your bedtime. I'm glad you read an entire book tonight, but you know, like go to bed. So
this cracks me up. It does remind me because like my son often will stay up late reading books.
Yeah.
But he's at this age where it's weird that he even can read books.
Right.
And then on top of that, he doesn't quite realize that he's reading them out loud. Like he doesn't know how to read to himself yet.
Yeah.
So we'll just overhear him like reading a book and be like, what book's he reading? Oh, okay, he's reading like the Pigeon on the Bus book, or
right.
like, you know, because he does like the inflections and stuff. It's very funny.
That's awesome.
So you can tell he's reading because he's pretty much screaming the book. But yeah. It's hard to shut that down because you don't want to turn off like the interest in reading and learning, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. How about plans?
Plans. All right. So I definitely hope to have this page completely inked and scanned and hopefully up on quarterlystories.com. So that's kind of where I'm hoping to be by Friday. Yeah. And then for anybody who might be listening to this, we're still kind of looking to book one more member of the Hundreds Anthology for the Artcasters tomorrow.
Oh.
And so definitely speak up and let us know because it's going to be the last of that guest series of the people from the Hundreds Anthology. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Plans for me. I think I'm going to keep cranking on this. I'm kind of taking a little bit of a break after that. So I'm not like starting any big projects or anything. And so I think I'm just going to keep playing with this fish thing. I'm just going to take this into like an illustration and then finish off the animatic. So I'm just going to work on that for a few hours every day until this conference. I think we're kind of wherever that takes me. So I'm not sure, you know, like where I plan to get, but
yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like a good, feasible project, but still complex enough to kind of keep your wheels turning. Yeah.
So
cool.
Okay. So should we jump into the topic?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So, I haven't checked to see if anybody is in the chat or anything, but let's check here real quick. All right. Looks like we got a few people watching, but nobody is jumping in the chat. So if you're watching this, share it, like it, all that jazz. And today's topic is regrets. And so I think there's a number of ways that we could kind of take this. It's an interesting topic. This will be a little bit of a shorter episode because I think we could talk about this for, you know, ever and ever. Like it's one of those really long ones. But I just want to brush over the idea that that you should live your life in such a way that you don't have regrets. And that's a simple thing to say. It's a little bit of a difficult thing to do. Um, but like I was in class yesterday, and it's in this capstone course that's like the last class that these seniors take before they graduate. And so a lot of these students, like I've known them for like 4 years. And I just asked him, I said, hey, like what, if you had a time machine, right, and you can go back in time, what advice would you give yourself? It's like one of my questions that really gets people to think, because I always ask them, like, what'd you learn? You know, what, blah, blah, blah. But if you ask them, like, right after they finish something really hard, and they all just finish this super difficult, like, giant group project. There's 10 people that work on one thing for, like, a semester, and so it's one of the biggest groups they've ever worked on, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
Several of them made comments that I really, really like, and it just kind of, like, keyed in where they were saying, um, they said, you know, I'd actually like to rewind back not just to the beginning of the semester, but to me as a freshman, and just say, you know what, like, don't do the bare minimum. Don't just do class assignments. Like, don't, don't do this. She's like, I took your class, vector graphics, and I knew Illustrator backwards and forwards, and then I didn't do anything with it. And then I had to use it again. You know, I took this class and I knew photography, and I took this class and I did this and I did all this stuff. And like, while I was doing those classes, as I was like, nah, I can get a B. It's cool. I can get an A minus or whatever. Like, and I'm happy with like the grades that I'm getting. Then fast forward to like this semester, and I had to use all of these skills all at the same time. I lost
Yeah.
so much. And
Yeah.
it reminded me of this thing that I always tell students, and only a few of them listen to me. Is like, listen, like, whatever you do, you need to understand the difference between urgent and important. And the difference between urgent and important is that urgent things rarely are important. Important things rarely feel urgent, but important things matter a year later, whether you do them or not. If you do them, you're significantly better off because of having done or developed or become that important thing. And if you
Yeah.
neglect doing them a year later, you will regret the lost time that you had, or the lost relationships or the lost opportunities. Because right now, I could bring in some people, like, I'm going to pay $10,000 for a logo. Nobody in this room is ready to do that, right?
Yeah.
No, nobody's at that. But you could be there in a year, right? You could be there in 5 years. You could be there in 6 months. And the only difference between you now and you when you're ready to do that is time and effort, right? And so how old are you going to be until you realize that you should live life with no regrets, that you should do the important things, that you should carve out that time? Kind of like what we
Yeah.
were talking about on Monday, just really got me fueled, like this idea of like, you should just make things and carve out time and do the things that you want to do, and stop talking
Yeah.
about doing the things that you want to do, and just make it happen. Because if you don't, years will go by and you will have regrets. You'll have nothing but
Yeah.
regrets.
Yeah. 100%. Um, yeah. I mean, it's funny because just thinking about that, like the idea of like kind of prioritizing the difference between the urgent and the important is such an important thing. Um, because like, just thinking about it, like a perfect case in point, like today, I had a client who's an old client that I love and I will always do work for, reach out to me and they want me to do some illustrations over the weekend. So that's kind of urgent. It needs to be done in the short term. And I love that client to death, and I'm going to put 110% into that job. But I still worked on my comic tonight, and I've carved out time over the weekend to focus on that client. But it's not going to pull away from that comic time, because at the end of the day, I'm thinking forward in time, and I'm like, what am I going to look back on with more pride? Like another T-shirt printed by some client with my art on it that made me a short-term amount of money, or a giant graphic novel that I wrote, lettered, inked, put out into the world, and told a story that I really thought was important to tell. For me, that's like a no-brainer. But that is a case in point of like the urgent versus the important. It's like the urgent work is like the temporary, like, hey, it helps the bottom line right now. It'll help us with the house and stuff like that, and whatever bills or whatever. But you know, the long-term one, the thing I've been carving away at, that's the one that like that can't get dropped. And if it does get dropped, I know I'll regret later on. So it's like what you're talking about, I put into action all the time. And then in managing people, it's the same thing. It's like, you know, you have to deal with the urgent, you know, when you're managing a team, but you also have to deal with the broader vision. And if you lose track of the vision, and the big stuff, the stuff that takes like increments to make happen, you'll lose all the temporary. Like, so all the temporary gains you get aren't permanent gains, at least in business when you're leading people, because you, as long if you're not moving your vision forward. And so that's another just kind of practical example of what you're talking about, where it's like, you know, in management, you definitely will regret if all you're doing is putting out temporary fires, because you're gonna have this giant like forest fire that's growing, that you're gonna have to put out years later, and definitely will regret not having paid attention to if you don't think of like the long term and the big implications, the broader thoughts, you know. So.
And a lot of what you're talking about, when I was in marketing director, art director, all that type of stuff, I would look at the difference between firefighting and fire prevention, right? And
Exactly.
so if I'm putting out fires, like what I'm doing is I'm just trying to minimize damage, but damage has already occurred, right? And you have to do that. Like if you just go, well, my house is on fire and it started to damage that, you know, the corner, and I'm just going to leave it alone, right? You know, I'm going to do this important thing that's going to matter a year from now. Well, your house burned down. That urgent thing that you ignored became really important. That does matter a year from now, right? But if you can get your team, your life, your whatever, right? I used to just tell everybody all the time on my team, like, our goal is not to take care of the thing that is on fire. Our goal is to put in practices in place and teach everyone around us how to behave so that there aren't fires, right? Fire prevention means that there's no fires, there's no damage, right? And you can, when you prevent fires, you don't have to spend time like rebuilding after that. You don't have to spend time like recovering from that. And what it opens up is that you can start building stuff, right? And so instead of just trying to minimize the amount of damage and destruction that happens, you can start carving out time to prevent damage and destruction, but also you've got this spot where you can build. And so I think that's true on like in an art department or in a company or in a team or in a group, but it's also true in like your personal life, right? If the only thing that you're worried about is like, I don't know where my next meal is going to come from, right? You've got a fire, you've got to figure out how to put that out, but eventually you've got to stop putting out that fire every few hours and figure out, okay, like I'm just living like meal to meal. I'm starving here. Like, what am I going to do? Right? How can you carve out a little bit of time to build something in your life to where you can prevent that? And now you've got your meals covered. Okay. Now you've got your rent covered. Now you've got whatever. And then you can start having some breathing in you and you're like, okay, what am I going to create? What am I going to make? And the idea in every aspect of your life is to switch from firefighter to fire prevention so that you can begin to build.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of the difference between the mindset of being kind of reactive versus being proactive. And so, I mean, you have to be in life reactive. Like, let's say you're driving and a car cuts you off and hits you or something. You know, there's an element of that where you have to be very reactive, like just to like survive. And that's how life is. I mean, sometimes you're heading on a path and like, you know, a car hits you or something like that, and you have to react. However, you know, you can choose better paths, and like even from like an accident or a fire, you can kind of assess, how did this happen, so that I can kind of redesign things so that won't recur. And then once again, you get back on that proactive path where you're kind of avoiding the inevitable fire, which you can actually dodge, but with proper planning, and kind of head in a direction that's going to better suit you and stuff like that. So, yeah, but what's interesting, when you brought this topic up, and maybe we can get into this, maybe we can continue this into the next one. But what was interesting to me was I thought about it, and I don't have like a massive amount of regrets in my life. There's a few I have, regarding art. And I think the majority of it is just like, I wish I had started comics a little sooner. I wish I hadn't waited till, a certain time when I was in college to kind of finally pull the trigger and finish my own comic. That's probably one of the only ones, and I can get a lot more into that, I think, as we continue this. But yeah, do you want to kind of tease maybe what we'll get into on the next art check for you? Like, do you have any major regrets?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same thing, not necessarily comic specific, but I had I was seeking entertainment for so long that I really avoided my calling of making, and even though I was entertaining myself with like kind of semi-productive hobbies, like I didn't really get started drawing until I was into my 30s. And so I wish I had started in college. So I think they're kind of the same, maybe with some different reasons or different stories. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a major regret. And then the other thing is, and I don't have any necessarily specific instances that I'm going to share live, but one of the major regrets I have is, like winning arguments, hurtful things I've said or done, that now I don't care that I won that argument or whatever, So there's kind of the relationship side of things.
Yeah.
And then
That's a good one, though.
Productivity side of things.
That's a really good one, because I think I have a similar regret. I think we're very similar personalities in that sense.
Yeah.
So maybe maybe we can use that as like a touchstone on Friday when we kind of continue the topic, if we can remember. I think we will, because it's a good topic. But maybe we can get into our own personal regrets and stuff. So Mike Emirates in the chat says he wished he had started finishing comics sooner too, and said also hello and gave the rock horns.
And that's an interesting comment, because he didn't say I wish I had started comics sooner. He wished he'd started finishing comics sooner. Yeah. Which is another thing. People start comics all the time and then or start anything all the time, but there's very few finishers out there. There's lots of starters. It's easy to start stuff, but there's very few people that finish something through to the end. So yeah, I think we should call it. So here's what I want to hear from everybody watching and listening to this. What do you regret? And I don't want to say this as a downer, but or was there a moment in your life where you could have gone one way, but you went another way to avoid a regret, and you're glad that you did that? I'd love to hear those stories, even if it's just, even you don't have to type out like a giant thing. Just say, hey, like I did this instead of this, and it was awesome. Or I don't know, I didn't do this, and I still regret it to this day. Like those type of things, I'd love that, because I think that type of thing is kind of fuel for some really good stuff in everybody's life. So.
Yeah, and I think it'll lead to a much greater discussion too on Friday. So when we start getting into how to live with no regrets. So yeah,
absolutely. And if you would like to see some of the stuff that I've eventually started making later in life, you can check out my stuff at CoryKerr.com. And if you want to see a massive, epic spanning biopic covering many things in Josh's life, you can check out QuarterlyStories.com. Also available on Tapas, which is a mobile app for comics. And if you don't have it, download it and subscribe to Josh right there. And as always, you can check out this podcast at CoryKerr.com/48HR. And we would love any dealios as far as shares and reviews and all that jazz. So you guys are awesome. Live without regrets, and we'll see you in a couple days.